So your superhero moment starts with chopping vegetables in the kitchen. Sorry, but these sacrifice poses are starting to look a bit tragically comical, don't you think?
No, I actually believe that raising my kids is a responsibility, not a shame. If we glorify motherhood, why do we caricature fatherhood?
Maybe because the real burden still falls on women. A few days of babysitting doesn't make someone a hero. That's not gender equality to me.
If a father is belittled just for being fully present in his children's lives, then the issue isn't fathers. It's the lens that diminishes them.
The host raises an eyebrow during a brief silence. The cameraman stiffens. A murmur starts to ripple through the audience. And then, in the producer's headset, Chris Pratt is entering the studio. Switch to camera 2, now. Sarah's face freezes. Mark doesn't smile, but the energy in the room has already shifted. Mark Whitaker woke up at 6:15 a.m., not by an alarm, but by the soft murmur of his young son Ben greeting the first light of morning. While his wife Lindsay still slept, Mark would head to the kitchen, brew 2 cups of coffee, leave one by her bedside, and quietly return to the kitchen. That had been their morning routine for the past 3 years. Mark had just turned 40. Tall, athletic, with dark brown hair he sometimes forgot to comb in the rush of morning routines. He used to work in the tech industry as an executive. Good salary, big office, endless meetings. But everything changed the day Lindsay fell into postpartum depression, and Ben's midnight crying became their new reality. "I won't postpone being a father," he had said. "I've got stories to tell, not just meetings to attend." Some people respected that decision, but many, especially his male friends, would raise an eyebrow and ask, "Seriously? You became a full-time dad?" Mark would smile and move on, because what others thought never mattered as much as the peace in his child's eyes. But the internet wasn't so forgiving. His modest social media account, where he shared parenting moments under the hashtag #JaDadLife, began gaining traction. Some praised his content, others mocked it. Critics labeled it a betrayal of masculinity. Some called it emotional manipulation in the name of fatherhood. And that's when Sarah Blake stepped in. Sarah was a rising feminist influencer. With 2.5 million followers, she was known across digital platforms for her sharp critiques on gender roles. Outspoken, sharp-witted, and highly influential, she came across one of Mark's videos and decided to make him a target. "Oh, so now we give medals to men for changing diapers? Women have been doing this for centuries. Stop selling fake heroism as equality." Her post went viral. Within hours, thousands were sharing Mark's profile. Comments flooded in. Some defended him, others mocked him openly. "New generation hero, the guy who heats baby formula." Mark didn't respond to any of it. But his views skyrocketed so quickly that a major podcast reached out with an invitation. Would he appear on air alongside Sarah Blake? When Lindsay read the email, she paused, then said only this: "If someone doesn't want to understand you, you don't have to explain yourself." But Mark wasn't doing this for himself. He was doing it for the thousands of others who, like him, felt unseen. So, he said yes. Right before heading into the podcast studio, he placed a handwritten note from Ben that morning into his pocket. It read, "Dad, you're the strongest man ever." At 11 a.m., the show went live. Sarah leaned into the mic, sipping her coffee. Mark took a deep breath. The cameras rolled, and the battle began. "Welcome back to the dialogue table, where tough ideas meet real people," said the host, Lauren, without flinching under the studio lights. From the outside, the studio looked bright and sleek, lights smoothing out every face. But around the table, the energy was anything but warm. A chill of tension hung in the air. At one end of the podcast table sat Mark Whitaker, dressed plainly in a gray t-shirt, composed but alert. At the other end was Sarah Blake, a digital warrior in every sense. Black blazer pinned with a feminist symbol, gold chain earrings glinting under the lights. From Lauren's very first question, the direction of the discussion was clear. Lauren, do you think traditional roles should be redefined? Or do some things evolve naturally? Sarah leaned into her mic. Men staying at home isn't the problem. The problem is this. When a man cares for his child, society wants to build him a statue. But what does a woman get for doing the same thing? Nothing. Because these men are buying visibility under the disguise of sacrifice. The studio went quiet. Mark turned to face Sarah. He had been waiting for that moment. Mark, sacrifice isn't about gaining visibility. Sacrifice is about accepting invisibility. And for years, mothers have done that. I simply chose to share in their silence. Sarah's expression froze for the first time, but she recovered quickly. Sarah, for many men, staying at home is a brief detour, but you're trying to turn your choice into a political statement, as if you invented the phrase, men can take care of children too. Mark, looking directly into the camera. No, I speak so that people will begin to understand instead of judge. Because for some of us, this wasn't a phase or a necessity. It was a conviction. Lauren noticed the rising tension, but the viewer count was soaring. Comments poured in. This guy knows who he is. Sarah just roasted him. Did he really tear up? What if Chris Pratt walked in now? At that moment, Sarah glanced down at her phone and smirked. Sarah, you know what, Mark? We see men like you. Things go slightly off course, and suddenly you're a role model. But real equality isn't about camera-ready sacrifice. It's about the silent kind. And unfortunately, your appearance here feels more like self-rescue than sincerity. Her words hit Mark, but only for a second. Quietly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small note, written by Ben that very morning. He gently placed it in front of the microphone. Mark, I'm not here to be seen. I'm here so my son never feels like he has to hide. The studio fell silent. Just then, the control room door creaked open. Lauren's eyes widened as a message crackled through her earpiece. The director pointed upward. The second camera shifted and zoomed in. Chris Pratt had entered the studio, without a word. He walked calmly over and took a seat beside Mark. The cameras went live again. Comments exploded. Sarah's face visibly tightened. Chris leaned into the mic and said just one thing. Sometimes being a hero just means staying. Chris Pratt sat silently at the mic. Sometimes being a hero just means staying, he had said. But that line reverberated far beyond the walls of the studio. The silence in the studio was instantly replaced by an explosion of online reaction. The live chat surged with thousands of viewers. Hashtags were born. Dad Dignity, On Chris Pratt Stands, Am Invisible Fathers. Within minutes, clips of the moment were circulating on Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit. Chris's voice layered over footage of Mark placing his son's handwritten note beside the mic. But there was still one person breathing at the table, Sarah Blake. She closed her notepad, squared her shoulders. Everyone expected her to go on the defensive, but instead, she took a different route. Sarah, Chris, I respect you, but you're in Hollywood. You can be a hero on screen. Here, we talk about reality. The image of masculinity still places a burden on women in society. Stay-at-home dads like Mark aren't the norm. They've become marketing tools. Chris nodded gently. Before speaking, he turned to Mark. Chris. You know, Sarah, this isn't just about gender. It's about empathy. People think they've learned how to talk without ever learning how to carry someone else's weight. The cameras zoomed in. Mark remained silent, but he wasn't alone anymore. After the broadcast, social media exploded. BuzzFeed, The Daily Wire, Vice, and Fox News all featured the podcast, pulling quotes and screenshots. Some of the headlines read, "Chris Pratt wrecks live podcast with one sentence." "Stay-at-home dad silences critics with son's handwritten note." "Modern masculinity on trial," and "redemption." But the real impact was outside the headlines. On YouTube, Mark's modest parenting channel, once with only 3,000 subscribers, jumped to 187,000 in a single day. His video titled "Being a Father" surpassed 9 million views. Women, men, teens, grandparents, voices from all walks of life joined in. I stayed home for years. This show finally made me feel seen. I cried watching this with my dad for the first time. Thank you, Mark. You spoke for the silent majority. Not all the reactions were supportive. Some online accounts continued to accuse Mark of masculinity glorification and called his emotional stance a male-centered pity parade. But Mark never responded. One morning, he found a small box on his front porch. On top, a handwritten note read, "Dad, Mom works. But I'm not scared anymore because you're home." Lucas, 9. Inside was a child's drawing. A boy, holding hands with a man. Below it, "This is what safety looks like." Mark pinned the drawing to his fridge, smiled quietly, then opened his inbox. A new message was waiting. Invitation, New York Times conference. What changes when fathers are seen? Mark opened the file. He accepted, but only under one condition. No live broadcast. Real stories aren't for cameras. They're for hearts. New York City, Upper West Side. The glittering hall of the Grand Central Forum was as packed as ever. But this time, the crowd wasn't made up of suited executives or media reps. It was filled with ordinary people, teachers, young fathers, elderly mothers. Some had come with strollers. Others clutched notebooks, as if a single sentence from the talk might change the course of their lives. 2 chairs were placed on stage. The host offered a simple introduction, and then the microphone echoed, "Please welcome to the stage, Mark Whitaker." The applause was modest, but firm. As Mark stepped forward, he scanned the audience. Unfamiliar faces who somehow knew him. People waving. A woman with tears in her eyes. A child holding a small cardboard sign that read, "My stay-at-home dad is my hero." Mark reached the mic. He hadn't brought notes. He hadn't rehearsed. Life over the last few weeks had already prepared him enough. "Mark, they called me a strong man, but all I did was try to understand my son. Staying home isn't weakness. Quiet responsibility is a way to change the world." A few people clapped, but most sat silently, hands resting on their knees, listening intently. Because this wasn't just a speech, it was a testimony. Mark continued. "Some belittled me along the way, but far more came forward and quietly said, 'I've been there too. Women, mothers, fathers, grandmothers. This isn't just about masculinity. It's about the courage to see the unseen.'" He paused, then glanced toward the back of the room. A familiar silhouette sat in the last row. Chris Pratt. He smiled and gave a small nod. But this time, he didn't take the mic. This was Mark's moment. Mark went on. "I'm not a hero, but I've seen heroism every day. A mother whispering goodnight, a teacher remembering a child's name, and sometimes a kid looking at his dad and saying, 'I'm glad you're here.'" When the final sentence faded, applause erupted. Not the kind from a talk show, but the kind that tingles your spine. A standing ovation filled with quiet awe. Eyes welled up, gazes turned modest, but everyone felt the same thing: respect. After the event, a woman approached Mark. A 10-year-old boy stood beside her. "Woman, I just wanted to say thank you. My husband stayed home for 3 years, but we never talked about it. Today, you spoke for us." Mark simply nodded. The boy stepped forward and handed Mark a small folded paper. Inside it read, "When I grow up, I don't just want to go to work. Sometimes staying home sounds nice too." Mark took the note and placed it in his pocket, the same pocket where, days earlier, he had tucked Ben's handwritten message. In the days that followed, Mark's speech reached 9 million views on the TED platform. Universities invited him to speak at panels. But each time, he made one request: if there are cameras, the kids need to be there too, because every story told is someone's truth. Sarah Blake remained silent. She offered no apology. She didn't make another public statement. She continued creating content on her platform, but the echo around her had changed. The once uncritical applause was now met with thoughtful silence. That evening, Mark posted one final message: a snapshot from his kitchen, Ben straightening the tablecloth, Mark preparing coffee in the background. The caption read, "For everyone doing the invisible work, we're here. And we're staying visible."